Cruise lines will happily sell you some of the noisiest, worst located cabins on the ship. And most people have no idea until it's too late. After decades of cruising, there are certain cabin types I simply will not book anymore. And I'm going to show you 9 of these, so that you can book like a smart cruiser instead of guessing. And stick around until number 9, because while this cabin mistake doesn't show up on any deck plans, it can ruin a honeymoon or anniversary type cruise. I'm Gary with Optimal Cruising, bringing you fresh cruise advice, money-saving hacks, and secret strategies the cruise lines don't advertise. Let's get started. I'm going to start off with the one cabin type that annoys me the most, and this is any cabin located below a pool deck. And this is because on cruise ships, overnight, all of the deck chairs are put away and tied up. And the process of doing this and then setting them back up in the morning, which usually occurs sometime between 5 and 6 a.m., makes a whole lot of noise scraping these metal chairs across the wooden deck, plopping them down, and hearing this happen over and over again to set up hundreds of chairs around the deck. If you have a cabin that is below a pool deck, you are going to hear this noise constantly every morning and in the evening if you happen to be relaxing in your cabin at that time. If you are a light sleeper or anybody that likes to sleep in a little bit, you definitely don't want this type of cabin. If you want to be in the middle of the ship, just go one deck below the pool. You're not going to hear a thing there. It's a huge difference. But trust me, that noise from that pool deck travels right to the cabins below, and it's almost impossible to ignore. I really love music, love to sit and listen to live music, but it's also very annoying to me to be sitting in my room and hear the constant droning on of a bass beat with no end in sight. And that's why I will always make sure I do not book a cabin that is directly above a nightclub or directly below the nightclub, because nightclubs can be positioned in various areas of ships these days. And if you have a cabin that is directly above or below, that bass beat is going to pound right through your floor or right through your ceiling, and you're going to be hearing that from 12, sometimes as late as 2 a.m. And it's hard to sleep with that, especially if you're a light sleeper. And even if you're not, it's still rather annoying. This is a particularly bad location for families because it keeps the kids awake and makes everybody tired and exhausted the next day. If you don't like sleeping with a subwoofer positioned under your bed, you want to avoid this type of cabin. Look at the deck plan when you're booking. It's pretty easy to tell. And a simple strategy to use is if you find a cabin that has a cabin to the right, a cabin to the left, cabins above, and cabins below, you're probably safe. Now, this next cabin would seem to be a safe choice, but it does rub some people the wrong way. At first glance, I used to think that booking a cabin above a theater was a good location because it gave you good proximity to a lot of things. Theaters are usually located at the front or the back of the ship, and they're usually near the main dining room and some other things on the ship that you're going to be wanting to do. And so if you have a cabin near there, it's easy to go up or down one flight of stairs and not have to wait in lines for the elevator. But I found out that if you have a cabin that's directly above a theater, you might think that's safe because the shows go on at night and finish maybe around 9, 10 o'clock, and that's it, and then it's quiet. But what ends up happening is you get a lot of rehearsals going on throughout the day. So if you're somebody that likes to take a nap in a cabin in the middle of the day, you might want to avoid that because you can hear some of the noise, the music, the singing coming right through the floor if you're right above the theater, and that can disturb the peace in the middle of the day. For some people, that won't matter. But if it does, you might just consider going one deck up above that. So basically 2 floors above the theater. It's the same location, one extra staircase to climb. It'll save you the headache from some of the noise that comes from these rehearsals that they frequently do during the day. If you've ever been in one of these first 3 types of cruise cabins so far, put it in the comments below and let me know how your experience was. I used to think it's pretty cool to get a cabin in the front of the ship. And some of these cabins can even be the more pricier options, like some of the suites can be located up there. But you can also get a regular interior or even balcony cabin in the front of the ship on lower decks. But there can be an issue with these that you have to know about. In the front of the ship, you tend to feel the motion more, especially if you're not on one of the bigger mega ships. And if you're in a low floor in the front of the ship, you're going to feel those waves if you have rough seas. And if you're at all prone to motion sickness, these are cabins you definitely need to avoid. And another problem with booking cabins in the front that are on lower decks is you tend to hear more banging noise from the waves hitting against the hull of the ship as it's moving. And this occurs in all types of seas. It doesn't need to be rough seas to hear that. So if you want to avoid that type of noise, you're better off being on a higher deck in the front, which could be more pricey, or get in the middle of the ship, because especially if you're prone to motion sickness, the middle of the ship is going to be a lot better for you than the front of the ship. But then what about the back of the ship? I've stayed in several cabins in the back of ships, and there's two things you really need to know about them. They don't bother me as much, but the engine noise and vibrations can really bother some cruisers, especially early in the morning on port days when the ship is docking. This can happen sometimes between 5 and 6 a.m. when you're still sleeping, but all of a sudden those engines are really going to get that ship turned in position just right. And if you have a low cabin in the aft of the ship, you're probably going to notice it. Now, cabins on higher decks in the rear of the ship can be really nice, and also some ships put their suites back there. But I've had regular balcony cabins back there before and loved them, with one exception. Sometimes the soot that comes from the smokestack of the ship will fall on those cabins. So just keep that in mind. If that kind of thing bothers you, you might want to avoid aft-facing cabins. Would you stay in a cabin in the back of the ship? Let me know. Put it in the comments below. Now, this one is controversial, and if you have a preference one way or the other, please let me know in the comments, because I've had a lot of cruisers tell me that they love cabins that are close to the elevators and stairs because it's convenient. You walk right out of your room, a couple steps, and you're at the elevators, or you can walk up or down one flight of stairs to get to where you want to go, and you don't have to troll down a long hallway every time you're going to and from your room. And this is true. But one thing that bothers me is I hear a lot of noise all the time, because if you're in one of those cabins right near the elevators, you can hear people talking. A lot of times you can hear them talking all the way from the elevator stations, and they also all have to walk by your room to get to their cabins. Sometimes you got a lot of kids on a cruise, and they could be running up and down the hallways a lot, going to and from their room back to the elevators and chatting it up pretty loudly in those elevator areas. So if you have a cabin around there, sometimes you'll hear this noise a lot. I have found that simply by selecting a cabin about 6 cabins removed from the elevator station makes a whole lot of difference. You can hardly hear anything from those cabins, and they're almost as convenient. They're still very close. That's my suggestion, but if you have a different opinion, I'd like to hear about it. One thing that really bothers me is going on a cruise and booking a cabin that's supposed to have a view and then finding out it's obstructed. Now, sometimes you'll know about this in advance because there are certain cabin categories that are rated as obstructed by the cruise line. So you know you're probably looking at part of a lifeboat or some pole or something else that's outside your window if you're booking an ocean view, or that's right by your balcony so you're not having a full view. But unfortunately, a lot of cabins, especially some balcony cabins, get rated as not obstructed when they actually are. So I'm going to tell you how to avoid those. I have found that on a lot of cruise ships across different cruise lines, the first level of a balcony cabin, so let's say the balconies start out on deck 5. Usually right below that, you're going to have lifeboats. And sometimes they'll put an awning over those lifeboats. So you can still see straight out, but you can't see down. And one of the nice things about a balcony cabin is looking right down into the water as the boat is splashing it as it goes by. And you see the wakes and the waves coming off of it. I mean, it's part of the experience. And I don't like getting into a balcony and then not having that full view. I have done that before. So now when I'm paying extra for a balcony, I make sure it's at least one deck above the lowest deck for balconies. And this next cabin, I never even thought about until I booked one by mistake. But first, if you're interested in an up-to-date list of the best cruise deals that you can book right now, just comment deals or click the deals link in our description and we'll email it to you. I've been on a lot of cruise lines and a lot of cruise ships, and I have to admit that they do a pretty good job of soundproofing their cabins. I've been in cabins where I know there were babies next door or noisy people next door, and I could barely hear a peep in my cabin. Except for the one time that I booked a cabin that was connecting, which means it has a door between it and the next cabin over, so that if you wanted to, if you had a group of people together with booking two cabins, you could open that door and just walk directly from one cabin to the next without going out into the hallway. Well, that breaks the sound barrier. And if you have a connecting cabin, you are more likely to hear any noise coming from the cabin that it's connected to. So it can be fine, but if you get people who are making a lot of noise or staying up late, you're more likely to hear that if you have a cabin with one of those connecting doors. So far, we've talked about noisy cabins and bad cabin locations, but smart cruisers don't just avoid bad cabins. They match the cabin to the type of cruise they're taking. I'll tell you about that next. But first, if you would take a moment and subscribe to our channel, hit that like button. It does help us grow, and we'll continue to bring you our cruising updates. I'll be honest, a lot of times I just book a cheap interior cabin because I can get more cruise for my money that way. Instead of taking 2 cruises in a balcony, I can easily get 3 cruises in an interior. But this is not always the best strategy, especially if you're going on a special cruise or a milestone cruise or a bucket list cruise. For example, if this cruise is for your honeymoon or your anniversary, or this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip like to Alaska or maybe to Iceland, or maybe a trans-Pacific cruise, you might just want to splurge a little bit because these are cruises that are going to set up memories for a lifetime. And for those types of cruises, I really don't recommend sticking to the cheapest interior cabin. In fact, I wouldn't do it myself. When I have a milestone, I splurge a little bit. I take advantage of some of the extras. I know it's going to cost more, but this is a special event. These types of cruises you will remember for the rest of your life. And while pictures of an interior room can be okay, I mean, if you've got a balcony with the sunset, the sunrise, the two of you out there, it's just something special. And if you're doing a cruise like to Alaska or Iceland or a passage, you really are going to be in a better position to see everything if you have that balcony cabin. If you're like me and you book a lot of cruises just to get away or to have an extra vacation, yeah, go for that interior. It saves you some money. And frankly, I hardly spend any time in my cabin anyway. But if it's my 10th anniversary cruise, I'm definitely getting that balcony for my wife and I. So now that you know which cabins to avoid, cruisers face a lot of upsells once they get on the ship. But which ones are worth it and which ones are a total waste of money? I'll tell you how to figure that out right here.